Hello, friends, and welcome. My name is Katie Grosh, and I'm the Faith Initiative Coordinator at Grace Farms Foundation. I am so glad to welcome you to this time of conversation with Steve Angle to discuss his book, Growing Moral, A Confucian Guide to Life. You might remember Steve from our conversation last year discussing the Analects of Confucius, and we are so delighted to have him back to this Books on Faith and Meaning series to chat about his newly published book. As we engage with different texts each month, from ancient classics to modern offerings from a variety of religious and philosophical traditions, we can ask and encounter important questions of meaning and purpose in the company of others. We believe that these texts can connect us to people, histories, and ideas, and that they can contribute substantially to our quest for flourishing life, both for ourselves and also for our communities. Before we begin today, I want to give a quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website afterwards to watch or rewatch and share with a friend. And if you are with us live today, please feel free to use the Q&A function at any point during the discussion. No need to wait to the end, just type your questions in the Q&A box as they occur to you, and Matt will weave them in throughout the conversation. And with that, I would like to introduce Matthew Croasmun, Faith Initiative Director at Grace Farms Foundation.
Thanks, Katie. The moral life can be hard, especially if we think about the moral life as a battle against ourselves. If we think of the moral life as involving striving against selfishness, and if our striving against selfishness requires that somehow we escape ourselves, step out of our own skin and adopt the point of view of the universe, and then we have to sort of stay on top of ourselves to make sure that we keep that point outside of ourselves. All that self-vigilance can be exhausting. But what if that wasn't what the moral life was about? What if it was possible to become moral rather than having to work so hard at pretending to be moral? And what if the source for such a life wasn't somewhere out there, outside ourselves, but rather right at hand? What if becoming moral was about cultivating the higher intuitions that we already have within us? I think that something like this, among many other things, is what is on offer in Growing Moral, a Confucian Guide to Life, our book for today, and the latest from our guest, Professor Steve Angle. Steve Angle is Mansfield Freeman Professor of East Asian Studies, Professor of Philosophy, and Director of the Center for Global Studies at Wesleyan University. A philosophy writer and researcher specializing in Chinese philosophy, Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, and comparative philosophy, his research focuses on philosophy's role in human rights, politics, and ethics, both in China and globally. And I will just add that personally, Steve has been my way into Confucius, into this whole world of scholarship and philosophy and insight. I have known him to be a generous thinker and colleague over the years. So Steve, I am so glad that you're able to be with us this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you for that just lovely intro. That's a great way to think about what the book is about.
Well, it really is. It's this really, I mean, we should just say, like, this is like an eminently like approachable book. Often when we think about ancient philosophy, it doesn't come to the top of our list of like, oh, that'll be accessible and sort of news I can use. But that is definitely what you've given us in this book. It's striking to me that in this book, you are not just writing as an historian, though you are one. You are writing as someone sort of within this tradition. You're not just an anthropologist telling us about what some people have thought over the years. You're actually like making some claims. When did Confucianism become not just a sort of area of research, but a sort of way of life for you?
Yeah, well, I think it was a gradual process where there were moments of clarity, moments of recognition that was perhaps what was going on, and also moments of puzzlement, wondering whether that really could be something that was going on. I think you're right that it's important ultimately to the kind of book that I wrote, because it's in some ways a very personal book. It's not just about old texts and old ideas, but it's about how they can influence, I think, in principle, anyone's life today, but very much my own. There was a point at which I began to see that what I was doing was professionally was writing and in the first instance, writing as a Confucian philosopher, as opposed to just writing about Confucian philosophy. And so that's been a process going back a decade, maybe more than that, of this sort of growing recognition that was what was going on. And as I reflected on, well, what could that mean? What is it to write as a Confucian philosopher? There are people who write as perhaps a Kantian philosopher or an Aristotelian philosopher, right? And I think for the most part, to say that you're writing as a Kantian is to say that you have certain theoretical commitments that you're trying to uphold in your work. And there's something about Confucianism, and maybe also something really about Kantianism, that we too readily set aside. But I think it's more in your face about a tradition like Confucianism, that it's not just about a set of theoretical commitments. It's about how to live a life. And understanding Confucianism is precisely understanding that fact. So that's, I think, what pushed, initially the kind of the theoretical ideas. Can I embrace and promote and perhaps even revise these ideas from the inside, as it were? Nudged me further and further to think about ways in which ideas of ritual, ideas of attention and reflection, and so on and so forth, commitment, really did inform my life in ways that I ultimately, at least convinced myself, would be recognizably familiar to Confucians from this lengthy historical tradition, if they just had a crash course on 21st century life in certain respects.
Yeah. You mentioned ritual, and you begin the book actually with reflecting on the passing of your father, and thinking about the power of ritual in that moment. How did Confucian philosophy sort of frame for you in important ways the sort of rituals surrounding the passing of your father, and your own sort of trying to process what mourning is and what it's for and why we do it?
Yeah. So I think that one of the occupational hazards of being a philosopher is, perhaps more than most people, having these kind of meta conversations going on in my own mind as life is taking place. So the question of reflecting on the way in which the rituals of, so my father and stepmother had long been part of a Congregationalist congregation in Massachusetts, and that's where the funeral took place. And so the sorts of rituals that one might expect around that. My father had served in the Navy, and so at the burial, there were two members of the Navy who were there to play taps. And so there were a bunch of different sorts of things that will be familiar in one way or another, probably to folks who are listening. But they had so there were these things that that other people experience, right? But they had a particular power and resonance, obviously in this case for me and my family members. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about a little bit, mostly not too much, mostly I'm trying to be present, but right, sometimes it helps to have a little distance when things are very difficult. And so thinking, why are we doing this? And why not something else? And then when I have really more time and spatial distance from participation in those events and I'm writing the book, that's even more of an opportunity to think about how rituals work for us, why they're important, why they aren't just things at major life events like a funeral, but are much more ubiquitous. And then in particular, why the Confucian approach to thinking about death is, I think, really profound and healthy. So it's not about an afterlife. It's not really so much about the person who dies. Confucians, over the centuries, have held a variety of beliefs about what may happen after somebody dies, different kinds of souls and so on and so forth. But that's not in any way the center of Confucian thinking, practice, or valuing around death. The focus is really on the rest of us, on the people who are still here, on the ways in which death is an enormous rupture in a relationship that has been, and certainly in the case of a parent who dies, has been just a defining source of meaning and value for one throughout one's entire life. And so how to grapple with that rupture, with the changed self that necessarily results from that, is an enormous challenge that we face. And so the Confucian thinking about death is around that, is around mourning, is around the role that rituals play in helping us to process, and ultimately, to the appropriate degree, at the appropriate pace, to get back to the rest of one's life, because it's about living. So dying is ultimately about what goes on for the living.
You say in the book about ritual that that by restraining and channeling our behavior, rituals help us to notice things that we might not pay attention to otherwise. And attention is another sort of important topic in the book. How do rituals do that work? What kind of attention, how do, that's not the first thing that maybe comes to mind when we think about a ritual, that it's like about training and restraining and channeling, sort of, in that sense, broadly retraining our habits of attention.
Yeah. So, well, let's stick on a funeral as an example. Although, again, I want to insist that it's not just about these big things that you might imagine happening in a church or mosque or synagogue. But one of the practices that we have in the U.S. from people in many traditions is to wear somber colors, maybe wear black at a funeral, often to speak in sort of hushed tones, and just in every way, in the way that we're carrying ourselves, presenting ourselves to others, there's this sort of feeling of restraint. And so why, right? Not all traditions are like that. You think of an Irish wake, which approaches these things differently. But at least for the sort of the Protestant traditions of my youth, that's very much the approach. And one of the things that it does is it allows, even so, there's a line in the book about some young cousin, you don't really know who this your cousin's grandfather was or something. Maybe you met them once in your life, and you'd really love to, I don't know, be on your phone or be telling jokes or something like that. And the ritual is that you don't do that. You don't have your phone out. You're not telling jokes. And if you have to really just sit on your hands and restrain yourself, maybe you're not noticing anything. Maybe you are, but maybe you're not. But it helps to create an environment where other people can really attend to what they're feeling, notice what they're feeling, can listen to the eulogy, take part in the liturgy, and as as you said, just notice these things about their own reactions, about the way it feels to be with others in a moment like this. And I think that attention is so important, because if we do actually attend to one another and to the circumstances that we're in, then that often, not always, and there's a whole story to tell about this, but that often is going to motivate us to act in the way that we're supposed to, and to act in the way that we should. Not that there's some outside rule that's telling us this, but as in your intro, that what you said, that Confucians are convinced that there are these powerful, good motivations within us. These feelings of care for others, respect for others, deference for others, and so on. And if we actually pay attention, then those things are going to be the things that are driving us.
So you say, so I'm just trying to think about this posture of attention, because so much seems to, well, it's all connected, but we're at this point, a lot seems to hinge on this these habits of attention. You say it at some point, I think, summarizing, I forget who's thought that active attention is neither forcing nor ignoring. I don't know if that was Mencius or who you were summarizing there, but that's really the sort of thought that I don't know, that attention, I mean, there's a lot of sort of work being done, or sort of a lot of attention being given to attention in Christian theological circles. And I wonder whether some of it is because it sort of occupies, as you're describing here, a some sort of space between active and passive. It's not exactly an activity, but it's not something that's just happening to you either. I don't know. It's that activo-passive sort of thing that's disposition, or how do we can you help me, give me the words to describe what this active attention is that's neither forcing nor ignoring? I know what it isn't. What is it?
So there's one of the ways that I frame it in the book is as looking for harmony. And so let's think about what that might not be, right? It's not just sort of special pleading, ignoring the fact that your neighbor or your coworker just did something that was really pretty problematic. So, no, let's just all get along, just kidding. Don't ignore what he just said. How about those Red Sox? That's forcing in a way. And so that's not what looking for harmony is about. Looking for harmony is training yourself to notice the possibilities for harmony, for things fitting together well, being poised to embrace and support those moments rather than missing them. And so, when we're talking about attention, partly it's literally paying attention, noticing small cues. For me, as a teacher, right, one of the contexts in which this is most obvious is in the classroom, when, right, noticing that, that student who maybe doesn't speak up very much has something to say, right? They haven't raised their hand right straight up, but you can tell they're looking at you a little bit more intently, or they're moving around a little bit. Whatever it is, you learn to be able to notice these things, and so then try to give them an opportunity to take part in the conversation. That translates into almost any different social context where we can recognize whether it's the dinner table or whatever it is. It's being a good host or hostess in a dinner party is about this, paying attention.
You also in the chapter on attention talk about a category of reverential attention. You say reverential attention is the stance of viewing what is before one, through the lens of concern for interconnected life. And that gets us, I want to spend a lot of time talking about interconnected life, because that seems especially central. But is that a sort of deeper version then, or somehow? How does that relate to the more sort of pedestrian, sort of just trying to be like aware and thoughtful of others? It seems like reverential attention is trying to get to some of it, maybe a little bit more bought into some of these neo-Confucian claims about sort of the world and the way that we're connected to one another.
Yeah, right. So if all we had from the Confucians was a sense of how to be a good host at a dinner party, that might not be entirely useless, but they presumably wouldn't have the traction that they've had for 2,500 years on a significant percentage of the world population. So, right, it goes bigger and it goes deeper. The question of reverence is something that comes up early for Confucians, gets developed in ways that I find particularly compelling by the neo-Confucians, right? This is the revival of Confucianism that gets going around 1000 CE. And it's really—
you're dealing with an old tradition when like 1000 CE is neo anything.
Exactly.
I love it.
Exactly, right. People ask me what is it I study, and my sort of brief response is often, well, the most recent 1,000 years of Confucianism. Right, exactly. And so that's neo-Confucianism, which is really, in a way, sort of a mashup of classical Confucianism and then Chinese Buddhism, with some Taoism thrown in on the side and various other, there's been all kinds of social and political changes that catalyze further developments. But so neo-Confucianism is a fascinating, 800-year-long strand of the overall Confucian tradition. And what the neo-Confucians have to say about reverence and reverential attention, it seems to me, is really sort of worthy of note. At the center of neo-Confucian thinking, which is, scholars debate about how continuous this is with the earlier tradition. And I try not to get too caught up in that kind of stuff. There's if you want to go there, we can go there. But I think this idea of the ongoing interconnected life-giving nature of the cosmos is central for neo-Confucians. And so reverential attention, what we're revering, is this value-infused cosmos that we are part of, that we're co-creating, right? So there is nothing outside of the cosmos for the neo-Confucians, right? Fundamentally different metaphysics from the monotheistic traditions that we're familiar with. So there's no God outside of the system. The cosmos is what it is, and it's infused with value. And we know that by seeing it, by experiencing it, right? And so reverential attention is ultimately paying attention to whatever is immediately before you in its entire context. So to the extent that we are having this conversation, at least at my end, there's an Apple computer involved, and thinking about not necessarily actively attending to this in every detail, but how much does it matter, the supply chain that led this to be sitting on my desk here, right? What sort of labor relations and environmental impact and so on and so forth were involved in that. right? Depending on the issue in the moment, the conversation, those things might be more or less salient. But ultimately, that level of interdependence is what this is pushing us to take seriously.
You quote Cheng Hao, I think, people with feeling regard heaven, earth, and the myriad things as one body. So this sort of strong claim of sort of somatic bodily unity,
right.
In which we all participate. And yet we don't always live in in awareness of this, and I think this is why a couple of times you appeal to Iris Murdoch's idea of fantasy, which I take it for her as something like the fantasy of our independence, and sort of imagining ourselves otherwise than this sort of than this interconnectedness. How should we think about that sort of why that persistent fantasy, this, especially in the modern West, right? This sort of imagination of ourselves. I mean, we're beginning to change. Climate crisis, among other things, as you suggest, global supply chains, these sorts of issues drive us to reflect on our interdependence and the networks of belonging in which we have our being. But for, again, broad strokes, for the 500 years before that in the West, we've been very, very convinced of our own independence. Why the persistence of this fantasy if the universe is just manifestly one of this, like, sort of an interconnected unity?
Right. Yeah, well, that's a great and deep question. I think that one part of the answer has to be making sure that we don't think that the one body idea is too much of a sort of undifferentiated oneness, right? And that we care for other things, that we are connected with them, that they're ultimately, in some sense, all part of us. Yes, that's what the Confucians think. But we don't care for everything in the same way to the same degree, and we shouldn't, right? And so the most powerful example of this, or sort of illustration of this, comes from Wang Yangming, the 16th century Neo-Confucian philosopher, who says that, look, if somebody was swinging at you, right, you would, or if you were falling, maybe we'll put it a little less kind of conflictually, you would put up your arm to protect your head, right? That's going to hurt your arm, but that's what arms do. That's what your arm is supposed to protect your head, and yet obviously your head and your arm are one body, literally, right? So similarly, there are differences in the ways we care about our body writ large, so the mistake is to fail to realize the ways in which, nonetheless, that we are all connected, right? And that just as how my children's lives go is central to how my life goes, right? So we are connected. They are part of me, part of myself. That's, I think, relatively easy to grasp. But the same is true no matter how extended we go. Ultimately, it's more attenuated, and my care for, let's say, the laborers in some factory in southern China that put this iMac together is also more attenuated. But those connections should be there, right? So one part of the answer is to make sure that we've got sort of the right understanding of the one body idea.
Yeah, let's pause there for a second. Again, so this one body image has been used in very different social contexts. So this is ringing like Stoic bells for me. Sorry to you and to our viewers here. This is why I'm going to put on my Paul scholar hat. This is Roman. So the Roman imperial powers deploy this sort of rhetoric. And I just thought, like, oh, thank goodness they didn't come up with the hands protecting the head analogy, because They would have just written that right onto, and that's why within the social hierarchy, those who are less central, like, feel the pain in order to protect the ones at the center. How does Confucianism avoid that sort of inference, or sort of thinking about human hierarchies in that way? Or if it does fall into that, what are the Confucian resources for sort of thinking one's way out of that dark alley?
Right, absolutely. So, boy, let's see. So, partly another word that you mentioned in your opening was selfishness. So not something that we've talked about yet. So one important resource that the Confucians have here is that if you think that arms, that's just what they're for. In fact, we don't really have to care about the arm, right? Let's just cut the thing off, and then just carry it around to ward off, blows whenever they might come. So it's sort of a ridiculous example, but the point being that insofar as one's care is not actually extending to as much as it can to other parts of one's body, then that's a problem. It's the problem of selfishness, which is really the root of all evil as far as Confucians are concerned. It is remarkable how far you can go to explain, to kind of diagnose and potentially begin to sort of treat really major sorts of evil using the concept of selfishness, but more important in a way, everyday sorts of problems, right? The things that we ourselves fall prey to and encounter in our lives every single day. And so Confucianism is not really so much about the great evil, although sure, that's within its bounds of criticism, but our everyday moral lives and their structure, that's really where I think Confucianism shines.
So then it strikes me that there are two solutions to this problem, neither of which Confucians seem to take. So there's the sort of Western vigilance that I mentioned in my introduction. Plenty of the monotheistic traditions would agree. Yeah, selfishness is a big problem, but many will come to some sort of vigilance over the self. Like, self's just not trustworthy. Actually, as go to Islam, there's a treatise on self-vigilance from Al-Ghazali. He says your soul is like a new business partner. There's good money to be made when you all go into business together, but you don't have reason to trust this person's morality yet. So yeah, you got to keep a good eye on them, or they could just rip you off. And this is how you have to relate to your own self. And that's maybe an extreme version in Al-Ghazali, and of course there are other resources in Islam and in other Abrahamic traditions that would push and that would moderate that in certain ways. But all right, that could represent one way, sort of vigilance over the self. Another solution that I'm relatively familiar with is in something like Tibetan Buddhism, where you would just say, like, selfishness results from an overestimation of the being of the self. You're just sort of you're sort of over exaggerating to what extent the self sort of exists independently. The Dalai Lama will go so far as to say the self is like an illusion. Not that it is an illusion, but it's like an illusion. And again, so you can sort of like ward off selfishness by just being like, well, what self? Anytime I say I and my, I am exaggerating. Seems that Confucians want to go neither way, but agree with the sort of agree with everyone that selfishness is a problem, agree with the sort of monotheists that some sort of selfishness seems to be a pesky problem, but they don't want to get into the self-vigilance. Neither do they want to solve the problem by giving in, as you said, to some sort of undifferentiated account of the world where there really is no self or something like that. They're charting some sort of middle path, it strikes me, which you describe as a sort of expansion of the self. What is expansion of the self, and how does that solve this problem, or open a different sort of path to solving these problems of selfishness?
Well, let's go back to begin with, again, to your wonderful intro, right? Talking about the resources that we have within us. So rather than thinking about the self as a problem, thinking about the self as a solution. There's a lot of emphasis in the tradition on our that there are problems that are kind of diagnosed in different ways in which we perceive the world incorrectly. We employ a kind of special pleading, ignoring things that we should be paying attention to. But those are problems in that way precisely because we do have this capacity to care and respect and defer and so on to others. And so there's a chapter, an important chapter in the book on cultivating our sprouts, right? This image of the sprout, which is on the cover of the book, right? And the theme of growing, right? Not imposing, but growing ourselves, expanding the self, but through a process of growth. We have the most important, probably single thought experiment in the history of the Confucian tradition is when Mencius or Mengzi asks us to imagine what would happen if you suddenly saw a baby about to fall into a well, right? And the idea is you would have this feeling of alarm and commiseration that wasn't because of any sort of extrinsic, instrumental reason, but just because you care. And that shows for him that sort of care is one among a number of basic capacities that we have that connect us to others, and are really the grounds for this idea that if cultivated in the right way, we can grow ourselves to become, in principle, a sage, right? Somebody who responds perfectly. And there's again, another super famous image from the tradition is this notion of Confucius himself as he grows morally through his life. He begins at age 15, committing himself to moral cultivation and learning, as the Confucians call it. And then by the time he's 70, he can follow his heart's desires without ever overstepping the bounds. So that sort of just spontaneous, perfect reaction, rooted, I think, in an expansive sense of the self and attending to everything in context, etc. So that's that. We can talk a lot about what you do, how you cultivate yourself, and there are different aspects. Some which look more like vigilance. I wouldn't say there's no room for vigilance. Some which, there's a fake it till you make it kind of vibe some of the time, and so on. But ultimately, the idea is we've got it within ourselves, and we can grow that so that it becomes a more and more reliable foundation for just full of care, joyful interaction with everything in the world.
It reminds me of another image that comes from Mengzi that I look at with my students every year. Is someone comes to him and says, "Education, it's sort of like making a wooden bowl, right? Like you gotta carefully attend to the bowl, and and Mengzi responds, it's like, no, not at all. because there's this agricultural image. It's in the nature of the sprouts to become a tree. You could cut down the tree and make it a bowl. That's true. But moral cultivation it's precisely not like turning a bowl on a lathe. It's like cultivating a tree, cultivating a sapling, cultivating a sprout to become what it sort of naturally would be. And that's the sort of, you talk a couple times in the book, in this phrase I think I picked up from you, but when we'll hear elsewhere in scholarship, sort of talk about Confucian optimism. There is I don't know, that's a sort of optimistic take on things, that like that becoming moral is a matter of growing moral, not becoming in the sense of one thing turning into another thing, but one thing turning into the fullest version of itself, its sort of natural target or telos in that sense.
You mentioned earlier my sort of dialogue with Iris Murdoch at different points, right? And agreeing with her that there's that fantasy is a problem. Fantasy is pretending the world is different from the way that it is. That's not to say that imagination is a problem. Imagination and imagining other ways that things can go is really important. There's another great theme in Murdoch's work, which is, if you pay loving attention to others and to the world, then you're going to get them right. That's the route to seeing the world the way it really is. And Murdoch is drawing on kind of Platonism and so on, so she's got some different ideas at various points from Confucians, but that's something that really resonates. So it's not, there is a kind of an optimism, but it's not naivete, or not completely naivete. And it's also not at least a certain kind of leap of faith, where you're just sort of doing something that's completely disconnected from your sort of empirical grounds for believing this. I think that there is maybe a kind of faith, a kind of confidence, commitment, right? There's a lot of things that are in the same area. And I know that faith is a complicated concept in a lot of, a lot of traditions. But as we talk about this optimism, right, I think that it's rooted in part in some extremely plausible views about our basic psychology, right? The baby well example, gets at things about us that are probably true, that modern science, I think, to a significant degree, goes along with Confucianism here.
Well, maybe that gives a moment, and we can come back to this. This may take us on a road that we want to find our way back from eventually. But you mentioned modern science, and I really appreciated about the book. You sort of have this you have in your scholarship had this sort of dialogue with contemporary psychology, and you're bringing some of the fruits of that to this book. It really helps build sort of plausibility for some of these things. But I suppose my question here really isn't about science in particular, but rather about something that you wrestle with at the end of the book, which is sort of thinking about the possibility of sort of Confucian ways of life. Someone sort of has called Confucian sort of wandering soul. Confucianism a wandering soul. Like, could Confucianism find a body? And so it strikes me that throughout the book, you're inviting us to consider being just such a body. And one of the key ways that you're doing that is you're well, you're inviting us to think about, for example, when we come to rituals, you're inviting us to think about our rituals, the ones that happen to be in our lives. And I have to say, like I teach some Confucianism each fall of my first years. And when I teach Confucianism the way that you discuss it in the book, these sort of, I think it's a sort of like formal Confucianism, right? Using the form rather, but allowing the substance to almost get like swapped out by different cultural contexts, different moments in history. But when I teach that sort of Confucianism, then I turn to another tradition. As it happens on my syllabus, next is Augustine. It feels jarring to me, right? Because at first, sometimes I have an instinct to sort of teach Augustine that way, and now we're not talking about any of the particularities of Augustine's claims about God or the sort of substance of his claims. We're just thinking about what he says formally about the ways that our loves work, our desires sort of shape our lives, and where our loves lead us, they are our gravity, as Augustine says, or something, right? And you could do a similar move with Augustine, sort of abstract him from the particularities of his claims. So this is all like a big windup to just ask, like, one more, like, I'm piling up my complaints. But like, I'm so struck. You've really gotten me like hooked on the Analects, and I'm so struck like by, for example, an Analect in which Confucius or Kongzi says that if so and so hadn't been allowed to govern, wouldn't we all be savages folding our robes on the wrong side, or some such claim like this. But I find myself reading that and I realize I don't know which side is the right or the wrong side. And most modern commentators tell me that I don't need to worry about it because I'm not wearing robes in public anyway, which all seems well and good, but it makes me feel, say like I get to the Analect about Xingtian's sort of dream for his life to spend a day down by bathing in the river Yi by the garden terrace. All right, so the rain terrace, I'm getting all the particulars wrong, but that's part of it, is like I find that like I don't know what to do with the particulars because I've been invited to sort of think more formally, abstractly, which I say I found so valuable. But then I have these moments where, and it feels ironic to me because I feel like Confucius, just as you were saying before about the sort of oneness of all things, it's not an undifferentiated oneness of all things. And one of the great hope or great tools or sort of resources I find in Confucianism is this way of thinking about the universal and the particular, and really being able to do justice to both. And yet I find my way at least of reading Confucius, which seems to be somewhat in line with what you're inviting us to do in this book, involves very much sort of like setting aside a lot of the particularity. I don't feel like I need to know the rituals of the Zhou dynasty. And I wonder if Confucius would really be as okay with that as it seems you think he would be. Long question.
So yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that, so one thought that I have in response, or at least in the beginning of response, is that it's always, since I've been kind of aware of and thinking about Confucianism, even just as object of historical study, it's been salient and important to me that it is an ongoing, changing tradition. So I didn't start at the beginning. I think when in college I was introduced to Confucian ideas for the first time, it was actually in the context of Neo-Confucianism, sort of a intellectual history class that's what the professor was particularly into, and so we dwelled on that for a while. But it was clear that there was already 1,500 years of stuff going on before that.
That's helpful.
And then in grad school, I ended up writing a dissertation that focused on a really fascinating transitional moment at the beginning of the 20th century, where Confucian ideas and other sorts of, Chinese intellectual resources and Western ideas, translations of them, et cetera, were all coming together. And what was going to come next, right? What kind of Confucianism survives and semi-thrives in the 20th century and thereafter? What else happens as a result of this encounter? And so, in short, the dynamism of ideas and of traditions has been really central to me, which is different from somebody who just goes and studies the Analects, and you might pay attention to the the immediate context and so on. But I think that approach might not be as generative for thinking of the tradition as dynamic.
That's great.
Right? And so then, yes, particularity is absolutely central. You can't have rituals without particularities. You can't have what I think is a very, sort of particularist approach to ethics, where we make judgments in contexts. There's not just an unwavering set of universal rules that we apply. It really is about drawing on our capacities to care and so on and so forth, other sorts of virtues, to make judgments in context. So that's very particular also. But if particularity matters, and the entire social, cultural, economic, et cetera, fabric of the world has transformed almost unrecognizably, right? You teleport Confucius to here right now, he's going to have a heck of a hard time figuring out what is going on.
Yeah.
And so it should be the case that we're talking about some pretty different things, right? Right. I mean, I claim in the book that Jimi Hendrix is a Confucian music maker, right?
Yeah.
So
persuasively, I'll say.
Well, okay. See.
Yeah, no. This is not resistance to what you're doing. It's asking. It's being persuaded by what you're doing, and then asking sort of after the fact about the costs. And so, I mean, like, for example, would Jushi have known which side to fold his robe on? Like if Jushi was like reading the Analects, would he know, like, oh no, I know which side that is? So I mean, would he have cared?
In the Song Dynasty, right, with respect to ritual and music, which often are paired as sort of technologies of the self, ways in which we can, things we can do that help us to cultivate ourselves, right? So they're very important, but they are ultimately more instrumental than anything in terms of the effects they have on us. So the Song Dynasty philosophers like Zhu Xi, so again, we're talking 12th century CE, were 2,000 years and more removed from the early Zhou Dynasty rituals that Confucius was writing about in the Analects. And they knew that the details of rituals matter. And they were quite aware that they did not know what the details were. Things had changed so much. Yeah. So there are two different approaches. There's one that's like, oh, let's figure it out. And so there's this kind of antiquarianism, historical research. Let's go, let's do our best to see what we can figure out and model on that. But that was really relatively idiosyncratic. It was rather, let's make sure that our rituals are good rituals. And so Jushi himself was the author of probably the most influential manual of family rituals of the last millennium in China. And sure, they're, in some ways, loosely modeled on ideas from the past, but I mean, a lot of them are pretty different.
That's fascinating, and I should say I find this again at the sort of meta level, at the level of form, one of the really rich contributions of the Confucian tradition is this rich understanding of what tradition is, and certainly seems to travel well. Thinking Confucianly about tradition, I feel, has made me a better Christian theologian, and thinking Confucianly, I think, about any number of traditions could really, because I think we can get caught in sort of modern Western sort of ideas about conservatism or sort of like, do we want to reform? Do we want to preserve? And you demonstrate in the book, and you refer to Confucian philosophers time and again, are trying to say it's one and the same thing, actually. The way that you carry forward traditions, the way that we carry forward traditions is by adapting them to new situations. A student of mine in the Life Worth Living class that I teach wrote their final paper on a reflection that there some words of wisdom offered by their grandmother at the Passover Seder. The grandmother said, she's like, when I look at the table and I see you and your cousins seated at the table and debating with one another, I know that I have done my work well. And this whole paper was a reflection on those two things, to both be seated at the table and also to be debating, among other things, what it means to be seated at the table.
Right on.
And it strikes me that what you're giving us here is precisely that, inviting us. This is a table at which we could seat ourselves, and in doing so, and at any table at which we might find ourselves seated, one of the main things we should do is be debating. What does it mean to be seated at this table? What are the habits of this table? How can we make them better? How can we make them serve our interconnected world better?
Thumbs up.
So, Steve, we are crazy enough, more or less at the end of our time. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for taking the time to talk about it. Really, it is a gift, and thank you. It's good that I should thank you publicly. Thank you for sort of opening Confucius for me. It's really been a sort of rich part of my sort of surprising, but really rich part of my intellectual life, and in large part, thanks to you and your sort of intellectual hospitality in this world. And I'm just excited to be able to point folks to this book and be able to say, he can do it. He can do this for you too. Steve is an intellectually hospitable guy, and it really does. It feels like sort of sitting down and having a series of great conversations with you. So thank you for the book.
Well, every conversation I've had with you, Matt, has really opened my eyes as well and expanded my mind and heart. And so I really appreciate this opportunity and look forward to the next one.
Right on. So with those thanks to our guests today, I'll thank all of you who joined us live or watching this later on the web. I hope that you'll join us again for Faith Initiative events happening at Grace Farms, including our next books on faith and meaning with, if I'm not mistaken, with Susan Wolf. So we'll look forward to that. There it is, next time, meaning in life and why it matters. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And until then, be well.